One of the things that I think gets overlooked about Fire Emblem Thracia 776 is the way it uses its characters. In Thracia, the way the cast is characterized and their individual stories tells you something about the world. Each one is a piece of a larger puzzle. Taken together, the cast makes Yggdrasil feel like a continent with history, politics, and people who are living through hardship. That is what I want to explore in this video. Thracia uses its characters as an extension of world building. By showing what it's like to live in Yggdrasil during this time through its characters, it makes the setting feel more real. Through them, we see how famine, propaganda, noble intrigue, and imperial expansion affect every corner of Yggdrasil. Before I fully get started, I wanted to once again beg you to like, comment, and subscribe. It means a lot, thank you. Shozo Kage actually came to me in a dream and said that if I get 1 million subscribers before the end of the year that the FE4 remake will be revealed, so that would be cool. One of the first things that Thracia reinforces is the injustice of genealogies Gen 1. Sigurd's army meets a tragic end, being wiped out due to forces outside of their control. In Thracia, we see that the few members of his army that did survive are struggling. Finn and Abel are the only characters from Gen 1 who are playable in FE5. In Thracia, that history does not make them respected veterans, instead it makes them wanted criminals. The Empire has branded Sigurd as a traitor, and anyone who stood by him is treated with the same suspicion. Finn, despite being pretty much a perfect knight, has to spend his life in exile, which speaks to how thoroughly history has been rewritten. As well, Abel has her memories wiped and spends most of the game as a prisoner, further adding to the tragedy of Sigurd's army. Sigurd's reputation also comes up when we meet characters outside of Thracia proper, such as with Misha. Misha is a general from Siles who has been conscripted into fighting for the Empire. She is also the daughter of Dihorba, one of the Silesian Heavenly Knights who served as the boss in Genealogy. In Genealogy, Dihorba is a pretty forgettable minor antagonist. In Thracia though, her daughter becomes a full character. I like this choice because it shows how the legacy of the first game's events left a mark on the world. The usual games are in large part about the legacy of Gen 1, and while it's easy to see how the major players and their families have been impacted, it's cool to see even minor characters live on in a sense. Misha also grants new perspectives on events from FE4. In a conversation with Nikarov, the events of Dance in the Skies are referred to as a civil war. Calling it a civil war reinforces that, from the outside, Sigurd's involvement looks less like happenstance and more like interference. The player knows that Sigurd never intended to meddle in Silesian politics, but the people outside his army, his presence could easily be interpreted as self-serving. I think this can be compared to his conflict with Eldigan in Augustria. In that case too, Sigurd was simply following his conscience, yet the result was the effective conquest of most of Augustria. And before that, he had already taken Verdane. Again, we know that he only intended to do good, but it sure is convenient that only intending to do good led to him conquering half the continent. It's pretty easy to imagine how Arvis could paint him as an usurper hiding behind plausible deniability. Misha also shows us what Celeste has become in the years since Genealogy. Her motivations are not revenge, but survival. Celeste is suffering from famine, and she is fighting only to provide for her people. We never set foot outside Thracia in FE5, yet through Misha's story, we feel the desperation of Celeste's people. And while not directly related to world building, I really like her dialogue with Leif at the end of the chapter. When defeated, she begs to die with honor rather than live in disgrace. Leif refuses, sentencing her to live on and see the Empire's cruelty for herself. Leif and Misha are kind of foils. Both are heirs to people who abjectly lost, both burdened by defeat, yet Leif insists that endurance is the path forward while Misha wants to die. This is, as the kids would say, raw. Despite having the most limited setting in the series, Thracia still uses its cast to show that the world exists outside of you. One of the strongest themes in Thracia is how ordinary people endure oppression. There are several examples of commoners to be found in this game's cast, so I'll just focus on one example. Dagdar and Gomez illustrate this vividly. Both were once bandits who worked together until Dagdar left for more noble pursuits. Gomez did not. When survival grew harder, Gomez and the others turned on Dagdar. This feud reflects the desperate conditions of southern Thracia. The land is barren, food is scarce, and the north provides no relief. In such conditions, banditry becomes a means of survival. Thracia portrays this without romanticizing it. Gomez is still the enemy, but his choices are understandable. This marks a pretty significant change from earlier Fire Emblems. In those games, bandits were faceless villains. In Thracia, they are given motives and context. They are still antagonists, but they are also shaped by their circumstances. As I said, Dagdar and Gomez are not the only ones. Tons of characters in this game are just ordinary people who, for one reason or another, have been pushed into fighting. Granted, this is something that just about every Fire Emblem game does, but it's still cool to see how the cast is shaped by the world around them. And, I don't know, I guess I just have a soft spot for characters that are just normal people without some extravagant backstory. Though, of course, not all of Thracia's characters are commoners, with many of them representing the nobility. Miranda, Princess of Ulster, is one of my favorite examples. Her life should have been a peaceful one, but when her father chose to protect the young Leif from the Empire, Ulster became a target. While Leaf was able to escape, Miranda's family was killed and she became a political prisoner. Miranda's story shows how even nobles suffered from the fallout of genealogy. She wasn't alive during Sigurd's campaign, nor does she have any strong connections to anyone involved in it, yet her life was destroyed by choices made years before. Thracia often highlights how ordinary citizens pay the price of war, but characters like Miranda show how everyone feels its ramifications. Another part of Yggdrasil's world that gains depth in Thracia is the Lop sect. In genealogy, they're mostly portrayed as faceless zealots. Through some new characters in FE5 though, they're given more depth. Salem is a former member who has grown disillusioned and defects. His presence alone shows that the cult is not monolithic and that individuals within do question or reject it. Also, current members trying to have him executed as punishment gives a bit more detail on their belief system. Sarah, Manfroy's granddaughter, adds another angle. The mere fact that Manfroy has a family humanizes him a little bit. He's obviously still not as sympathetic as many of the other villains in Yggdrasil, but the detail makes him more believable as a person. Maybe part of why he was so desperate to resurrect Loptir is because he thought it would protect his family? It also kinda connects to this part in genealogy where Sela finds a child spirit Aloptis, reinforcing that even the darkest factions have human elements to them. Thracia tries to add dimensions to the Lop sect, and while it's not quite as much as I would have liked, it still has the effect of enriching the setting. Thracia also plays with the idea of historical inaccuracies within its world. Fire Emblem has always modeled itself as a historical epic to some degree, stuff like the levels being presented as chapters or the mid-chapter narration reading like something out of a history book. To add to this historical feeling, Thracia includes discrepancies between its world and FE4's. In genealogy, Julia being the only inheritor of Naga's bloodline is a pretty important part of the plot. In Thracia though, Linowen, a noble of Tara, also has Naga blood. I don't think the point here is that Linowen always existed and we just didn't know about her, rather I think it's a deliberate contradiction. I think it's meant to mirror the way real history works, where accounts differ and rumors spread. Just bear with my neurosis here. The same can be applied to ambiguities about other characters. Did Arvis only ever have his 2 children with Empress Deirdre, or did he sire an illegitimate son with one of Eltomer's generals? What happened to Lachesis after the Battle of Valhalla? Who fathered Dermot and Anna? Even Leaf's own story is subject to variation. Some accounts may say that he merged into Selef's army after a devastating loss while defending Leonster, while others claim he liberated Thracia independently. These contradictions give the setting a sense of realism. History is rarely a neat single story, and Thracia uses its cast to suggest that even in its own world, events are contested. The main antagonist through most of Thracia is House Frege and its various subordinates, the most memorable of which is the young knight Olwen. Olwen's military prowess is incredible, and she's by far the most threatening enemy you face when you fight her in Chapter 13. For as strong-willed as Olwen is, her story shows the ignorance that most of the Empire must be living under. She's blissfully unaware of the child hunts until Leaf brings it to her attention, causing her to defect. I think this fleshes out the enemy factions in Yggdrasil a bit by showing that a lot of the people who are lower on the totem have an incredibly narrow view of what's actually happening. It makes it easier to understand how so many people are willing to abide by the Empire when you learn that most of their worst actions are being kept secret. This can kinda connect with what I was talking about earlier with Misha. The propaganda the Empire puts out shapes the world and the people in it. Olwen was never a bad person. She was molded into a knight by Frege and was only willing to carry out its wishes for as long as she was blinded by their lies. I think this adds to the world building by showing how much the Empire's narrative has embedded itself into the world. Thracia 776 builds its world through its cast. Nobles, commoners, outsiders, and soldiers all represent different perspectives on the same conflict. They show us famine, propaganda, oppression, and the difficult choices people make to survive. I think this has a powerful effect on the overall story. Instead of a flat backdrop, Yggdrasil becomes a real living world. Every recruit is more than a unit, they are a glimpse into how war reshapes lives. Thracia may not have the sweeping scale of genealogy, but in many ways it feels more human. It's not only the story of Leaf's struggle, but of everyone caught in the Empire's shadow. That's why Thracia's cast is so memorable to me. They're a reflection of the world they live in. Also, I promise I will eventually make a video on a topic other than Thracia. I replayed it recently and love how deep its writing is. Genuinely, spin the wheel and whatever Thracia character it lands on, I can probably give you a pretty lengthy diatribe of why I think they're great. In fact, let's do it. Okay, Tina. She's a subversive character. She's the closest thing this game has to a moe blob and is in the designated cute girl class. Despite that, her whole gimmick is that she can steal. I think this is meant to show how living in these hard times corrupts even the most innocent. Also, her and Pern can be seen as kind of a twisted version of the Lena and Julian archetype. Anyway, I'll stop now. Thanks for watching.